Hello, this is Dave Kroll. Today I'm going to be building a model of a car wash. Now this is the same example as is in our user's guide, so you can follow along if you'd like to. But I'll be adding some other tips and tricks just to show you some of the things in ExtendSim. This is the car wash model. Cars arrive, they wait in line, and they're washed in one or two wash bays, and we'll try both of those. And then they leave. So it's a pretty simple model, but you'll get an idea of how ExtendSim works and how to build a model in ExtendSim. To build a model, I begin by creating a new model worksheet, and I'll just click on the new model worksheet here, and that creates a blank worksheet. And I'm going to open the item library window because this is the way I like to build models, is to drag blocks in from the library window. I'm also going to set the simulation runtime to be 480 minutes. So I go to Run Simulation Setup and say 480 minutes. Okay, so we're going to run for 480 simulated minutes. Now, in this model, we've got things, or what we call items, moving through the model. They're cars. And that makes this a discrete event simulation. And in any discrete event simulation in ExtendSim, we need an executive. We don't need to worry about it too much. It handles the event calendar and the attributes and some other things that are going on behind the scenes. And there are some tuning parameters there for large models. But we don't need to do too much other than put it in the model. So I'm going to drag the executive from the item library window into the model window. And I won't have to worry about that anymore. Now our cars arrive via a create block. So they'll be created at random intervals every 4 minutes. So I'll drag a create block into the model. I'll open the dialog by double-clicking on it. And here we can see the dialog for the create block. I can create items randomly or by schedule, or I can have even infinite items available. I'm going to leave it random because that's the way our model is working here. And I could pick a different distribution, but we do indeed have exponential inter-arrival time, which is every 4 minutes we'll have a car arrive. Now, once the cars arrive, they're going to wait in line. So I'll have a queue here. I'll drop in a queue. And I will connect the output the item output connector from the create block to the item input connector of the queue. Now these connectors are the double-walled blocks or handles on our blocks. So I'll move the mouse over the item output connector and I'll drag it over the queue. And you notice that as I get to the point where I've got a valid connection, that line becomes thicker. So right now I've got a valid connection and now I don't. So now I've got that valid connection. I can see that because the line is thicker. I let go and I've got a valid connection. Once cars arrive, they'll wait in the queue. I'm going to take a moment here and label our create block as well. So I'm going to call this Dirty Cars. And I'm clicking in this label in the lower left-hand corner of the block. It's right next to the help, which will give us help on this particular block. But each block also next to the help has a label. So I'll call this Dirty Cars. And in the queue, I'm going to label this as the entry line in the same spot. Now in the queue also, I can specify whether or not it's a sorted queue or we require a resource before the item leaves. So that's this pop-up here. And I can specify if it's a sorted queue, how are we sorting? By an attribute value or a characteristic of the item, by priority. So maybe we want red cars to go first. We like red cars for some reason. But I'm going to leave this as a first in, first out queue because that's probably accurate in this case. Now, once the cars enter the queue, the next thing we're going to do is go into the car wash. And we're going to use an activity block to represent this. And the activity block represents two components of this. One is the time required to wash the car, and the second is that the wash bay has a limited capacity. We'll try one wash bay, and then we'll try 2 wash bays. So I'm going to scroll up here and grab an activity block. Now I'm going to connect this in a little different way than I had connected the other block. I'm going to use a kind of a shorthand way of doing this. If I just drag that activity block down into the model, I just bring it up right next to that queue, it's connected automatically for me. So that saves just a moment in making that connection. Now in the activity block, I could also have a random delay, but in this case, it's an automated process and it's going to take exactly 6 minutes. So I enter 6 there for the delay. And we have a maximum capacity of 1. So we're going to start with 1 wash bay and see how that works out. Now, if you're astute, you may have noticed that we've got cars arriving every 4 minutes, but it takes 6 minutes to wash the cars. So there may be a problem there. Let's let the simulation model show us what's going on there. And I'm going to label this as a wash bay. Click on the OK button. Once the cars are done with the wash process, then they'll leave. So I'm just going to add an exit block, and I'll just drag that right on there, connect that up like that. So I've now got a working model at this point. I'll label my exit block. Now I've got a working model at this point, but I think I also want to get a little more results out of here. Now the blocks will report some statistics on themselves, but I want to see over time how many cars are waiting in line and how many cars have completed the wash process. So I'm going to add a plotter, a discrete event plotter from our plotter library. So I'm changing to the plotter library. So I clicked on a little pop-up we have up here, change to the plotter library, and grab a discrete event plotter. And I'm going to add something that's not in the tutorial, but it's something I like to do in my models, use a named connection. Now, named connections are ways of creating kind of hyperlinks from information in one place in the model to someplace else in the model. And this helps you kind of organize and document the model. And also, if you without the named connections, you end up with connection lines all over the place, and that's kind of ugly. So the named connections are really helpful in organizing and documenting your model. So I'm going to take the length of the queue, and I can get the length of the queue from this single-walled connector here that's called queue length. So the double connectors for the items are the things moving through the system, in this case the cars. And the single connectors are for values, information. So this is the queue length. You notice that some of these connectors also have these inverted triangles below them. That means they're connector arrays, and I can pull them down to get more information. So in this case of the queue, I'm reporting all sorts of information about what's going on in the queue, the average length, the priority, whether or not it's full, that sort of thing. Also, the connector arrays can mean that you've got an array of kind of more of the same. So our exit block has a connector array with multiple inputs, so I can have any number of items coming into that exit block, any number of sources of items coming in there. So I'm going to take my create a named connection, and I do this by double-clicking on a blank spot in the model. So I'm just double-clicking, no rocket science here, and I'm going to call this my cars waiting. Okay, and I'm going to create a second named connection. I'm going to call this cars washed. Now I'm going to connect my cars waiting connection to the length connector on the queue. So I take the length connector, connect that right down there. So I've given that same thick line as I had before, so I can see I've got a good connection. And oh, that's interesting. I've got a dotted red line. Well, that happens to mean that I've got a connection. I've got my length connected to my cars waiting named connection, but the other end of the cars waiting named connection isn't connecting anywhere, or it doesn't exist. So that's kind of a partially completed named connection. I get a dotted red line to show that. So I'll fix that in just a moment. Let me connect to my total cars washed here. So again, I've got another dotted red line there that says that's kind of a partially made named connection. So I'll take my cars waiting named connection. I'll right click and I'll duplicate that to make a copy of it. I could retype it if I want, but it's easier just to duplicate it. I'll duplicate my cars washed. Now watch what happens when I connect these to our plotter. Then you'll see that dotted red line will go away. So I'll begin by connecting the cars waiting, and I'll make that connection. You can see that's thicker, so I've got a valid connection. My dotted red line turned into a black line. So now I've got the information from that length connector is going into the plotter. Do the same with the cars washed, and of course we'll see that dotted red line go away there as well. So now I've got a completed model. I've got my cars arriving, they wait in line, they get washed, and then they leave, and I'm plotting out over time the number of cars waiting and the number of cars washed. So I'm going to run the simulation. It's going to happen really fast, so you might hear a little ding through my microphone here, and that means the simulation is done. So it happens almost instantaneously. If I open up the plotter, I can see that, again, I've run for 480 minutes. I can see my cars waiting is the blue line. We can see that climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing, and I've got probably close to 50 cars waiting here. And it looks like I've completed about 80 cars, and if we do the math, saying it takes six minutes per car, we run for 8 hours, yeah, we're going to do about 80 cars, so that makes sense. But we got some pretty patient drivers out there. I guess we're probably the only car wash for some distance around, so people are willing to wait for quite some time. We can get more details on that if we look in the queue. So a number of the blocks that have results, the utilization and average length and that sort of thing, we'll have a results tab. So I opened up the queue by double clicking on it, go to the results tab, and I can see that currently I have 50 cars in line. So yeah, it's a popular car wash. Maximum 50. The average was over 20. So there's, if you show up, you expect to wait. The average wait is over an hour. The maximum wait is 186 minutes. So it looks like this thing is just going bigger, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's a bit of an issue. But let's look at adding another car wash. Before we do that, let's animate this so we can make sure what we've got is basically going on. What we've got put together here is what we want. Let's turn on the animation. I'm going to change the animation just a little bit so that we have something that looks like a car going through here. So on the animation tab of the create block, I'm going to change this from our green circle, which is what you get when you add the block to the model, to a car. So a little picture of a car going through here. Then I'm going to turn on animation by clicking on this little green bouncing ball here. So you see it's got an X through there. When I click on that, that X goes away. And I can speed it up or slow it down with the tortoise and hare buttons here. And let's watch this run. And we should see our cars arrive, go through. And we're seeing a little queuing going on there, a little more queuing. And eventually, if we watch this long enough, we'd see that queue build up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 cars. And ExtendSim, by default, if you don't change anything, every time we run, we use a different random seed. Now, you can control that if you want, but that means we're going to get a little different results every time we run. Okay, well, I think we've seen enough to this to know that we're going to have a pretty big queue. So I'm going to stop the simulation. And let's look what happens if we add a second wash bay. Now, one way we can do that is to change the maximum number of items in this wash bay from 1 to 2. But I'm going to do a little different way because I want to explore some routing options between the two wash bays later on. So I'm going to make a little space for myself in the model. Drag that up a little bit. I'm going to duplicate the wash bay. So I'm just making another copy of that activity. I'm going to rename these as well. So I'm going to call this wash bay. Check which one I have. There we go. Wash bay 1 and wash bay 2. I don't have to rename these, but it helps to know what the differences are later on. And I'm just going to connect from the output of the queue to the input of the activity of the new wash bay. Now, there isn't a lot going on in terms of routing here because I connected wash bay 1 first. The cars will tend to favor wash bay 1 over wash bay 2. And that's about all the control I get if I'm just using this kind of parallel output of items here. We'll look into something more sophisticated in just a little bit. In the exit block, I'll add another input, and I'll connect the output of the wash bay to there. So let's run this, just adding a second wash bay. And if we run this for a little while, we should see already that things are improving. I'm not seeing any queuing going on. And by this time, when we had only one wash bay, a little queuing, but not too much, we were already seeing about 10 cars in there. So I'm going to turn off the animation, let it run to completion. We can look at our plot again and see that, yeah, we got a little queuing going on there, but not much. And it looks like we got over 120 cars through there. If I look at my queue statistics, we can see that our maximum length was only 8 cars, so that's down quite a bit. Our average was about 1.2. Average wait is less than 5 minutes, so it's looking quite a bit better. Now, if you remember, I said that I wanted to add some more intelligent routing between the wash bays. So I want to kind of balance the workload between the two wash bays. I'm going to go back to my item library here and add a select item out. And this is wherever we want to make a decision or routing of items. And I'm just going to delete these connections. I double click on those and clear that connection. Clear that connection. I'm going to add a select item out there. Pop that on there. And I'll draw that there. Now this is giving me more options as to how I select which wash bay I'm going to go into. I could make it random, so 50% of the time I go to one, 50% of the time, and kind of a random selection. I'm actually going to make it sequential, and this means that it will go to one wash bay and then the other wash bay, and then alternate back and forth. Now, this is kind of a nifty option here, this if output is blocked. That means that if I'm going to go to wash bay 1, then wash bay 2, wash bay 1, wash bay 2. And if wash bay 2 happens to be busy and I want to go there, but wash bay 1 is available, if I just do a strict sequential, that means I'm going to wait for wash bay 2, even though wash bay 1 is available. So if I say items will try unblocked outputs, that means it'll go around and try different outputs, different wash bays, given that the one I should be going to is blocked. So this makes it a little easier to model real-world systems. It's actually something that's kind of tricky to do if you're not, if we didn't have this option here. So what this is saying is, yeah, I'm going to try to go sequentially, but I'll break the rules if it means I can get more cars through here. It's actually a pretty good representation of the real world. So let's watch this run now, and we can see our selection going back and forth. There we go, run the animation. So we'll go back and forth between the two wash bays, just like that. I'm going to change one other thing here too in this model, and that is that I'm going to say predict the path. And that means that the item won't enter the select block until it knows that one of the wash bays is available. So this is another sophisticated features of ExtendSim that allows us to actually hold the items in the queue waiting for one of the two wash bays, so that this select block really doesn't have any capacity on its own. And if we watch this, we'll see cars waiting in the queue once in a while. The model cooperates with me here. There we go. So we're seeing a little waiting going on there, and the items will not leave that queue until there's space in one of the wash bays. Okay, I'll stop the model. Now, one of the things that happens in car washes is that you don't always have, you don't always just need a wash bay, but you may also need an attendant that actually does the car washing. So let's add a resource to that, and we've got a number of kinds of resources, but one of the easiest ones to add is a resource pool. So I'm going to drop a resource pool block into the model, and you notice this doesn't have any item connectors to it. That's because that the blocks communicate to the resource pool by name, right? By referencing it's the name of the resource pool. So let's give that resource pool a name. We'll call it attendant, and we'll say we've got 2 attendants available. And then in our queue, I can now say, well, we're not just a sorted queue. We need a resource pool here, and I need 1 attendant. So what this means is that before the car can enter a wash bay, they need a couple things. They need an attendant, and they need the wash bay. And when we're done, we need to release that attendant. So I'm going to, again, make a little more space for myself here in the model. I'm going to grab a release resource pool. This will return the attendant back to the pool of available attendants. And I'll just kind of drag that over there so it's kind of over the line. There we go. And that connected it up for me. And I'll release by name. We'll call it attendant. And I'll duplicate that block. Drag that down there again. So now we've got our attendants all set up, ready to go. So cars arrive, they wait in line, they grab the attendant, they make sure there's space in the wash bay. They go through the wash process, they release the attendant, and then they leave. So let's run this again. We've got our animation on. And what we'll see here is the number of available attendants up in this resource pool block, and we'll see that change from 2 to 1 to 0, back up to 1 to 2 as they're being used and released in the model. Okay, now we've decided we want to make a little more money in our car wash. We're going to add another service. In this case, we're going to do not just a wash, but a wash and wax. And it turns out that it's fairly expensive to retrofit our wash bays to do both the wash and wax. So we're going to have one wash bay that does wash and wax, and then one that does just our wash. So I'm going to add an attribute to the model, and this is going to track on the car, or as a characteristic of the car, whether we want the wash or the wash and the wax. So again, make a little more space in the model here. I'm going to add a set block, and this will set the value of an attribute. So I just put that over that line there, and that'll connect that up for me. And I'm going to create a new attribute. I'll put the dialog of the wash, the set block here. I'm going to create a new string attribute. And a string attribute is something that describes the item. It's a text descriptor of the item. So create a new string attribute. I'm going to call this preference. And I've got just two preferences. It's either wash or wash and wax. So I'm going to do wash, wash, and wax. And the value I'm going to get from a random number block. So I'll change to my value library. And these are blocks that deal with just numbers. They're just providing values to the model. I'll pull in a random number block. Connect that up. And I'll make this an empirical distribution. I scrolled over the top of the window there, but I selected an empirical table. And I will say that I have two values in my table. And my preference attribute can either be wash or wash and wax. And 75% of the time, I'm going to wash. And watch what happens is I click that 25, I've got a little running total down here. My probabilities have to add up to 1. So it's saying, well, so far you've got 75%, you're not quite at 1. When I add the last 25%, that little red 0.75 will disappear. So I've got 75% of the time I'll wash, and 75% of the time I will wax, wash and wax. Now I need to change my select block so that I'm sending my washes to the first wash bay and my wash and wax to the second wash bay. In fact, let's take a moment and rename this. Let's just say this is wash, just so I know what's going on here. And this I'm going to make wash and wax. And also our wax, it doesn't just take 6 minutes anymore, it takes longer, it takes 8 minutes. So we'll increase that time delay there. And I'm going to change my select block. So it's no longer sequential, I'm no longer alternating back and forth. I'm going to make this based on a property, and that property is our preference. And the preference is going to be either wash or wash and wax. If it's wash, we're going to select output 0. We can see that's wash. If it's wax, we're going to select output 1. We'll see that's wash and wax. Now I'm going to make another change to the model as well. I want to be able to make sure that the model is doing what I want it to do. So I'm going to change my animation just a little bit. You remember we changed the picture moving through the model, the animation of the cars going through to a little car. I'm going to change it in my create block I'm going to change it in my set block based on a preference. So go to the item animation. I'm going to change my items using a property. And in many of the tables in ExtendSim, you'll see this whole plus or minus. That says we're going to add or remove rows. So I'm going to make this 2 rows, 1 for each type. And my property is preference. And the value of that property is either going to be wash or wash and wax. So if it's wash, I'm going to keep it as the car. Sorry, for wash, I'm going to keep that as a car. And if it's wash and wax, I'll make it maybe a truck. Here's my truck. Now, you can add your own pictures to this if you'd like, but this is an easy way to, these are just our default pictures. Then you add pictures just by dropping a picture into the pictures folder in ExtendSim, and it will be in that list for you. So let's watch this run. We should see all the trucks go to the wash and wax, and all the cars go to the wash. And we'll see that a car won't go into the wash and wax, even if the wash and wax is available, because only washes go into wash, and only wash and wax goes into the wash and wax. So that looks pretty good, and I can run this out, turn off the animation, look at my plotter and see, yeah, I've got a little more queuing here, which I would expect because it's now a little more complex, a little more logic going on. But it still looks like it's pretty reasonable. I could add, if I wanted, reneging and bulking and all sorts of other good queuing stuff in there, but we'll leave that for another exercise. The one other thing I want to do is add a little bit of a control panel to this model. So I'm going to use a block called the buttons block, and this allows us to put buttons onto the model. So that's in the utilities library and a buttons block. And I'm going to add 3 buttons. I'm going to add one to run the model, one to turn the animation on, and one to turn the animation off. So I've dragged a buttons block in the model, and I can write an equation here that says, whatever I want my buttons to do, or I've got some predefined buttons here. So I said I wanted one to run the simulation, so there's running the simulation. I'm going to use something called the clone tool, and this allows me to take any element from a dialog item and put it out on the model worksheet. So I grab the clone tool up here. I'm going to take my button up there that says run simulation. I'm going to drag that out to the model. So there's my run simulation button. And then I'm just going to take this and duplicate this block a couple times here. And I'll create one for animation on. Clone that out. And one for animation off. Clone that out. Now remember, I could put a real wide range of things in this. I can add blocks, I can delete blocks, I can do all sorts of things from this equation in here. In addition to just running the simulation, turning the animation on and off. So it's pretty open-ended. Okay, so now I can do this, and I can turn the animation on and off. We'll see the model changes just a little bit of that. I'll leave it on. I can run the simulation for a bit. I can see what's going on here. Turn it off, and it'll just run to completion. So there's quite a few more things we could do with this model, but you've been with me for a little while yet. You're probably ready for a break. So I will stop here and leave you to explore the model on your own. This is Dave Kroll from Imagine That. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I hope you enjoy working with ExtendSim.